Hey guys, Argent here. This is about my fourth or fifth time making this video, so I hope you don't mind my incoherent rambling, as it were. So I think it might be useful just to kind of give my position on a bunch of stuff, just to kind of get an idea where I'm coming from. I know it's self-indulgent, but I think clarity is very important. You'll sometimes get people who do blogs or do any kind of opinion journalism, or just journalists in general, and they don't really state anywhere what they themselves believe. And I think it's important because it's important for their readers or their viewers to kind of know where they're coming from. So they can kind of judge the bias in it. Just if they're going to argue with them, they can kind of tell what angle to come from, etc. So maybe that'll be helpful to them. So, I guess just let's get into my my worldview a bit. So I guess just to start with kind of metaphysics, I am both a Platonist and a Catholic. Basically, they kind of stream from one another. In short, kind of what the Platonism is, and it kind of governs how I view the rest of the world, is specifically, I guess, kind of more Neoplatonism. That's the idea that there are forms that exist. Forms can mean a couple of different things. Some Platonists take it to mean somewhere in the heavens there's a perfect circle. I take it to mean that there's an ideal, and that ideals have a objective existence separate from physical reality. That is, the concept of a circle exists independent of any particular circle. So kind of the thinking is, because any circle in reality is not actually a circle, because of the limits to our eyesight, because of molecular biology, because of a lot of things, a circle is actually a many-sided shape. You can't really have a purely round line. Or perhaps you can, but my understanding, at least from what I learned back in math classes, you can't, so it's just an approximation. And my general thought is that I kind of agree with Thomas Aquinas, that Platonic forms exist in the mind of God. That is, the perfect circle is what God conceives of a circle. And God is transcended, so he can have the image of perfection that we don't have in the physical world. And in kind of Platonism, and in particular Neoplatonism, reality is viewed as, to a certain extent, emanations from the divine. Now, we use different kind of terminology and a slightly different construction with the creation of the universe, but in essence, things in the world exist closer to or further away from kind of an ideal. For instance, humans are the highest thing in creation, with the exception of the angels, of course, because we are the most like God. We are created in his image. We possess a lot of attributes similar to God. So I kind of value things based on, I guess, kind of how I view their place in the cosmos. So life is infinitely greater than an inanimate object, so it's much closer to God. The good man is much closer to God than the wicked man. A good action is most closer to God than a lesser action. And I kind of apply that across the board, getting into kind of more practical stuff. A civilization that is more peaceful is normally a good thing. By peace, I just mean there's not a lot of random murder. People can walk the streets, particularly at night. There's not a lot of rape, that kind of thing. That's a good thing. Progress is often a good thing, and I mean progress in the sense that people are healthier. They live longer, they experience less pain. Pain is an unavoidable part of life, but to live a life with less pain is a good goal. That's not to say pain doesn't have its merits. It certainly does, and I've made a lot of videos about that. But the goal of society as being kind of the flourishing of humans, allowing them to attain their full potential, and I have kind of a different view of full potential than kind of what a progressive would view it as. But a society that does that, that promotes moral standards, that promotes religious values, that lead people closer to God, is closer to kind of the ideal than a society that does not lead people towards God. Now, I think it's important to say that obviously perfection is not attainable in this world. Christ himself said, "My kingdom is not of this world." You can't have the kingdom of heaven on earth, but you can have better and worse societies. Now, that being said, I also believe, in addition to my idealism, in pragmatism to a certain extent. There are always, kind of one of my mottos is all things bow to reality, or all things are trumped by reality. That is, in the real world, you have a lot of competing goods. It's in a sense, to kill someone is a bad thing, but to execute a murderer, can be a net good on society, because it shows justice, it increases social trust, it scares other criminals into maybe not acting. So, and that's kind of what that's kind of the Machiavellian streak in me. Machiavelli said that only princes have the privilege of lying. And to me, why he said that is because to be a prince, to be a leader, there's a reason why they get such lavish praise. There's a reason why they have such, they get paid so much, or they have such kind of excessive lifestyles, because to be a leader is to kind of sacrifice your moral decency. And kind of just to refer to Dark Souls, Gwen viewed his leadership so seriously, he cast himself onto the first flame to keep it burning, to keep the world going. And that's kind of how I view the burden of leadership. In the ages of old, it was a monarchy, etc. But monarchs, even like good Christian ones who were devout, are faced with real-world problems. They're internal and external enemies. They have to dole out justice. They have to wage war. They have to do all sorts of unsavory things. And that's sad, but that's also reality. And I guess I kind of view a healthy society as a society that acknowledges both kind of the divine and the ideal and reality, and tries to move towards the ideal as much as possible, knowing that to reach it completely is not of this world. But that's kind of how I view the West and how I view what I call the infinity will. That we as Westerners have within us this animating force that permeates our civilization, that is our civilization, that is this fire that drives us towards the divine. That kind of Platonism and Neoplatonism is the natural state of Western man. It's what propels us to build airplanes. It's what propels us to go to the stars. It what propels us to care so much about being morally good, about improving our society. It's why we kind of get into things like human rights, democracy, etc. A lot of these things have very good aspects to them. The issue is, I think to a certain extent what happened is we went so far in that direction, we're almost kind of becoming like a completely idealistic society like India maybe. Because India and a lot of East Asian societies are so idealistic, they completely neglect reality. And that's why, to a certain extent, I guess the sociological explanation is India doesn't have a sewage system because the people are only concerned with eternity. They're only concerned with the spiritual. And I think the West, more so than most civilizations, succeeded in kind of balancing the spiritual and the material better. So I think there's an equilibrium there that needs to be restored. So how does this kind of, like, I'm rambling on about all this metaphysical stuff, so how does this kind of relate to reality? Well, I think at the core, most of my ideas are kind of based on my Catholicism. Now, to a certain extent, this is different from how I was before, but I've always kind of been a moralist and a rationalist. How do those two interact together? It means I try to have a very strong sense of good and evil, but at the same time I try to understand the real world. I don't kind of wish it to be, I don't pretend it's something it's not. Sometimes in the real world you have to do bad things. Sometimes you have to do evil for the greater good. Sometimes to ensure the survival of the civilization you have to do really bad things. To me, kind of the concept of sacrifice and the concept of kind of martyrdom is more of an individual than civilizational thing. To die for your beliefs, to die doing the right thing is good, but the state is something different. Your civilization is something kind of fundamentally different from that, and I think that civilization and the state can't be run just on idealism. Certainly, idealism is very important, and a society that's completely spiritually dead will collapse in upon itself and become a low trust hellhole. But at the same time, a society completely consumed by idealism will turn out like India, or to a certain extent something like Africa, where there's just not really an interest in material improvement because they're focused on other things. Um, so I kind of, and that's kind of my expression, is between heaven and earth. Um, that's kind of an Eastern philosophy I kind of like. China viewed itself as the middle kingdom between heaven and earth. It had to balance the dictates of worldly and supernatural and spiritual power, and we kind of see that in a lot of iconography from the West with the two-headed eagle. The two-headed eagle being church and state. That the earthly monarch must balance the dictates of both. So let's just kind of see how I kind of apply this to a lot of different situations. My nationalism, that is, and this is kind of how I define nationalism at least, is the belief that people fundamentally have a right to preserve their people, that is the genetic stock, the biological stock, the thing that the people who have evolved in many cases over thousands and thousands of years, and their culture. People have a fundamental right to preserve that. I also think in general people have a right to a homeland. Now, as always, these things are subject to reality. There may not be a place to give people a homeland. It may be a case like the Amerindians, that breaking up the existing countries aren't really viable. In which case, there's always alternatives. You could give them autonomous regions. You could kind of give them their own area to do their own thing. You could just let them remain separate. And that causes a stream of other problems. But I do think at a fundamental level that is something important, that they be allowed to maintain their genetic stock and maintain their culture. And I guess that's why I don't exactly call myself a white nationalist. Because my only concern isn't just for white people. That may be my people, but to a certain extent, there's some problems with the concept of just whiteness. And it's not that I don't use the term and I don't think it has any meaning. But to a certain extent, if we embrace full white nationalism, you get the perspective that the French people don't matter. The Italian people don't matter. The English don't matter. The Polish don't matter. All that matters is this kind of amalgamation of whiteness. And yes, there is a European identity, and I don't deny that. There's a white identity, I don't deny that. But to take kind of a view that many of them do, we kind of take the view that there isn't a difference between white people, there isn't a difference between white cultures, and that to a certain extent the people of each kind of ethnic group within the, I guess we could say, Caucasian race don't really deserve individual credit for what they've done. Now, I guess, and I guess maybe I'll just talk a bit about race here. My general view on race is, yes, it does exist. Yes, it does matter a great deal. I don't really hate people of other races. In fact, some I quite like. I quite like East Asians, for instance. I know there's a lot of crap, and I make fun of China and stuff, but I find their civilization very interesting. And I think that's something to keep in mind about me. And this is partially just because I studied a lot of this in university, a lot of like history, political science. I took a couple courses in Indian philosophy. I find other cultures and other civilizations very interesting. I guess you could say I kind of have a bit of a real respect for them, and that I take them seriously. I take them seriously as kind of competing worldviews. And even if I don't agree with them, and even if I kind of think they're barbaric or bad, I still enjoy reading about the Aztecs. I enjoy learning about kind of their culture, how they viewed the world, their history, how they developed. I really enjoy reading about China, its form of government. I enjoy reading Indian history. I really like it. I think diversity is important, but diversity has to be done on a world scale. And we have all these interesting different peoples and all these interesting different cultures, and they all look different aesthetics, and I think that's a good thing. I think it makes the world a lot more interesting. I think it provides a lot of perspective to study other cultures. So I think that's a good thing. I just don't necessarily want a multicultural state. A multicultural planet, yes, but people have to have their own places. Good fences make for good neighbors. I don't really have any issue with being allied with a country like Japan. having cultural exchange with them, trading with them, maybe, and having people from each country kind of travel to the other. But I think at the end of the day, it has to be controlled by both countries and both peoples. I think that's fairly reasonable. We can trade with Japan, we can be allied with Japan, we can fight wars with them, but in the end, Japan is for the Japanese, and whatever people, or be it the French or the Americans or whatever, their country is for them. So that's kind of the way I view it. There's nothing wrong with respecting people who aren't your people. There's nothing wrong with maybe adopting certain aspects of them that you think are superior. Like the Japanese adopted a lot of Western technology, Western military tactics, etc. But Japan didn't stop becoming quintessentially Japanese. If anything, it helped to forge a unified Japanese national identity and end a lot of the bitter, pointless infighting that had been going on for generations. So that's kind of my view of that. And with regards to race, I kind of view race as I guess there's different parts of a people. There's kind of like the civilizational soul, there's their culture, and there's their biological nature. And among white people, I think to a large extent, the biological natures are close enough that you can have a white person from one country go to another and eventually assimilate. That's not to say there aren't genetic differences between them, but if we do a thought experiment, if we have a Polish person who goes to Britain, for instance, and marries a British girl, and his kids grow up maybe with a couple Polish things, but with learning English as their first language, etc., and growing up there, I don't think they'll have problems integrating. That's kind of how America was built. America is kind of a fusion of different European peoples who kind of made kind of a new ethnic group that I'd call American within the white race. It's kind of this mixture of a bunch of different things. But they're able to integrate it. And you have like Italians and Irish and Germans who all go to America, and they're close enough that they can kind of integrate, and they'll maintain probably parts of their culture, but it largely works pretty well. So I guess that's kind of my view on race. I mean, you can have people from the same race to a certain extent moving between countries and integrating. I think they can integrate in a way that, say, a Chinese person could never integrate in Britain. It would take generations upon generations for that person to become indistinguishable from the local population, where for like someone from Poland or someone from Spain or someone from France, it would only take a decade or a generation or two. So I guess that's kind of my view on it, and I think people are fundamentally different. They have different expectations, they have different behaviors, they have different forms of government that are appropriate to them. I think it's important that they're kind of separate and they can pursue that. And that kind of comes from my Catholicism in a sense, because I think people aren't happy with multiculturalism. People don't like it. People don't like multiracial societies. It leads to things like Brazil, where the upper class and the middle class have to pay death squads to cull the lower classes. It leads to a lot of heartache and destruction. Most multicultural societies are multiracial or even multi-ethnic within people of the same race. It almost always leads to civil war. It leads to separatism. It leads to the government having to practice affirmative action. It leads to kind of just the eventual collapse. Like even when we have like the Czechoslovakia, where you have kind of two fairly similar, I know they'd get mad at me for saying that, but two kind of similar West Slavic peoples, they couldn't stay together as a country. Yugoslavia, which was all South Slavs, couldn't stay together as a country. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was all white people, it couldn't stay together as a country. And they split up, and ultimately, I find in Europe, once World War II ended and all the borders largely reflected the different ethnic groups, or at least were different cultural unions, because there's different kind of groups within the different kind of countries. Like there's a bunch of different ones in Spain, but Spain is kind of the overarching culture. A lot of the wars and the resentment between countries worked out. Because there weren't really large German minorities in other European countries, there wasn't an impetus to regain those minorities for Germany. The borders kind of started to reflect the ethnic makeup, and it led to more stable states with higher social trust, with less political unrest. Now that may come back, but it won't probably come back along ethnic lines in the same way it was historically. Like, if we look at probably the most ethnically pure state in the world is probably like Japan. And I don't think there's really any concern that Japan, because its identity is so strong, that it'll break up, that it'll have kind of the catastrophic breakdown. Japan's a very high trust society. It has a very low murder rate. There's corruption and there's other problems, but by and large, there's such a strong sense of Japaneseness that in like World War II, they were willing to just die for Japan. Um, and I kind of think that's optimal because I think it's very important to have solidarity in society, and that's a core aspect of Catholic social teaching. That you have solidarity in a society. Another principle is that you respect the individual worth of a human. I don't really deny that anyone, be they African or Aborigine or white or Asian, is a human. I don't deny that they deserve respect and they deserve dignity and they deserve to be treated well. I don't deny that. I agree with that. I think, though, that they need to be treated well in their own country because they won't be treated well in another country. Even if you shower welfare on them, they aren't happy. The blacks in America aren't happy after decades of attempting to uplift them. The Muslims in Europe aren't happy. The whites in Africa aren't happy. None of these multicultural states are happy. In fact, it's miserable. It leads to crime, destruction, death. And to me, I kind of view my duty as a Christian to try and help these peoples get better, to help them, or just that is the ideal state of affairs, where people have their own countries and they can be stable and they can live in a place where they trust people, where they understand their neighbors, they understand their culture, etc. Now, this comes to the issue of people say, well, you're Catholic, so you want to convert the world. Isn't that go against that? I guess to a certain extent, but to me, that's one, like I said, that's kind of reality. Yes, I want to convert the world. Yes, I want to do evangelism. Yes, even in countries that have never been Christian. But to a certain extent, that's to me the reality. The reality to me is that Christ rose from the dead and that baptism saves, and that the Catholic Church is the church that Christ founded. If I'm going to be sincere to that and not just wear it as a cultural badge, I have to believe in converting other countries. That is simply truth. It's truth to me in a sense that aerodynamics is true. I don't think just because like you have a different culture that you can construct something that violates the laws of aerodynamics and it'll fly just as well. That's not to say though there can't be authentic forms of Christianity that take on very different cultural trappings. That's not to say there couldn't be a Japanese rite of Catholicism that incorporates a lot of imagery and cultural practices from Japan, so long as the theology's down. That's not to say Japan couldn't become Christian and the emperor could just switch from being a god figure to having divine right in kind of a classical European sense. So I guess it's just kind of a balanced issue for me. I don't really see why everything kind of has to be perfect, because things aren't perfect. The world is deeply flawed and fallen. So you just kind of have to take what you have and do what you can with it. I guess that's kind of a bit of my philosophy. You try to make the best societies you can. You try to make it as best for your people, but sometimes you have to make compromises. That's just kind of the nature of life. We can go on about having a pure state. We can go on about constructing our own religion that fulfills all the political goals of the moment, but that's not really reality. That's just kind of LARPing. That's just kind of making something up for the sake of the moment. I don't really know what's traditional or right wing about just rationally kind of constructing these forms of government that are supposed to work all the time. They just don't. History is not clean. History is not tidy. You can't always predict things. Shit just kind of happens, even to the smartest people. So I guess that's kind of my philosophy. I guess you could call it pragmatic idealism. But no, it's motivated by kind of a nationalism, general kind of right-wing ideas, and kind of social Catholicism. So I hope that was kind of clear. Hopefully that kind of gave a bit of my worldview. This is Argent signing out.